Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Concord Township Zoning Commission meeting for Tuesday, March 7th, 2017. And tonight we have several things on the agenda, but the biggest thing on the agenda is an outline of proposed zoning amendments. And by my count, we have about 13 of those to go through. So Heather's going to walk us through each of these, and we're going to talk about the proposed language of each of these changes.
Okay, so as you all know, we've been working on some potential zoning amendments since fall, actually. When we first originally thought we wanted to start looking at the off-street parking section, which was section 29, and our goal was to try to incorporate some green infrastructure type developments. And then as we started doing that, we started looking at other sections, and it kind of snowballed. So that's kind of where we're at today. And then in addition to that, we've added some additional language to create the new Innovative Site Plan Development Overlay District, which is currently already in our text. However, what we're doing now is proposing to change the way it's processed, and then also tightening up the standards that make it more in line with the Concord Town Center Master Plan that the trustees adopted in December of last year. So I did provide in your packets a potential timeline of how this may go if everything is, as planned. That's just for your reference. However, we had a few changes to the packet since we mailed it out to you that we're going to kind of swap out a few things, eliminate a couple things just tonight. So the first thing on our outline of the proposed amendments, if you're looking at that, where we have all the summary, the very brief summary of the different sections here. Section 6, under general requirements, staff was originally proposing to require new language that would require a zoning permit for a demolition of a building or a structure within the township. We put some preliminary language in there. However, after we mailed out the packets and got additional feedback from our legal counsel, we were advised that it would be best to just leave that in the hands of the county building department because they require a demolition permit. One of the reasons why we were originally considering it was because there have been instances where residents have demoed a structure that put their property out of compliance. For example, they had a freestanding garage that's required when you're required to have 2 enclosed parking spaces, and they demoed the garage, which then made their parcel not in compliance with the fact that they don't have enclosed garage space. But that's far and few between, and so we're going to go with the recommendation of our legal counsel, and we're not going to be proposing any changes to section 6, so you can just recycle that. Or I can take those back from you, whatever.
Excuse me, do we have anything for sheds? If we have a shed and decide to tear it down and maybe put a bigger one up, you have to get not only a building permit to put the shed up, but we also have to get one to tear the old one down?
I'm not exactly clear on what triggers a demolition permit with the county. I mean, if it's like a small freestanding type shed that's not, doesn't have a permanent foundation, they probably don't require some type of demolition permit.
But if you happen to have it on a brick slab or concrete, then that would fall into that possibly?
Maybe. I know, Cindy, you looked into the demolition. Do you know offhand? Do you recall reading at what point are you required to get a demolition permit?
No.
We could look into that, but I don't know the exact rules. It would have been nice if we could have maybe done that as a backup to the county. So there have been instances too in the township where people have demoed other things that aren't necessarily structures and they haven't gotten the necessary permits,
Right.
where it's caused issues for other people down the road. So sometimes if the township says, hey, where's your demolition permit, that would require them to go to the county, and usually the county level they found out after. But it was the opinion of legal that we just left it in their hands as far as the county goes.
Okay. In other words, you'll be getting phone calls.
What's that?
In other words, you'll be getting phone calls. Should we or shouldn't we, or do
yeah,
we
maybe.
have to? Or
Right.
The reason I ask is there's, on our street, practically everybody has a shed for something. Freelonic stuff and everything, and some are bigger than others. And many times you see them taking them down or bulldozing them down, not I should say bulldozing them, but taking them down to put bigger ones up, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have to get a permit to put another one up,
Right,
but would they have to get one to tear the old one down?
right. We can look into that, and I can follow up with you in an email or something.
Yeah,
and
could you
let know.
please?
Yeah,
The only reason I asked that, it's ironic, because I had a neighbor a couple of weeks ago ask me about that.
oh, okay.
So, and they know that I'm somewhat the president of our homeowners association,
Mm-hmm.
so they always call me, you know, for that, and plus they know I'm on the zoning board, so.
Okay,
But thank God they call me, because rather than doing it and then upset people that are like their next door neighbors and stuff.
Mhm.
So if you wouldn't mind,
no, not at all.
please, thank you.
Yep. Okay. And then as one small proposed change for the definition section, Sydney has a handout on that. A slight revision to one of the existing definitions. I already have it. So the proposed additional text is highlighted in yellow here for your consideration. This is, oh, I'm sorry, right before that. With the demolition proposal, we had inserted a couple of potential definitions in section 5 for demolition materials and disposal. Those are coming out as well. So those aren't part of the amendment. But as far as the definition of school, we were asked to consider from the consultant for the town center plan to maybe expand the definition of school based on some current trends that they're seeing as it relates to testing centers and high-tech vocational post-secondary, like educational facilities that aren't necessarily included in our definition. So, for example, I was over at Avon Commons over the weekend, and in one of their plazas, they had like a ACT prep testing center, like in one of the little strip malls. It's kind of it's an educational-based type of school. You know, you can go there for tutoring and things like that, and we may want to consider adding that to our definition. That would open up the door for those type of things within Concord Township as well. Any thoughts on that? Should we include that as a potential change, or do you have any reservations about that?
While we're making changes, why not include that
Yeah, it would
to
make
broaden it?
sense.
You know, where was talk of the I-STEM or whatnot that has come up for the new town center, or anything else testing, secondary.
How does that, I guess I'm thinking of your example of Avon Commons. I agree with the definitions, generally speaking, sounds cool to me, but I'm sort of contemplating the impact. So from the standpoint of zoning, how does that affect something like Avon Commons? I mean, is that, because I think when I'm thinking of our tables, I mean, I don't know that we put, that's like a retail center, and they've got this thing in there, is that, you know, covered in table of uses? I mean, how does the,
Right,
how does definition fit, you know, so I'm great with all these additions as a school, but how does that ripple through the zoning text in the sense of how is it applicable, or does it exclude things now, and or does this change how we use? Because in something like that wouldn't really fit any of our retail, you know, that kind of zoning, we wouldn't have that as an use, right?
Well, schools currently are conditional uses in the town hall, is it the neighborhood or the commons? Right here at where it's the town, one of the
Here,
TH
right.
districts, school is a conditional use. And then we're also proposing to have a school as a use that would be allowed in the innovative site plan development. And then schools are also conditional uses in the R1 and R4, but they're all conditional uses.
Okay,
so-
well, because I was thinking in some of the stuff we're talking about now with the, over there in the, you know, the development and all that, and that could be something that someone would come in and thinking, well, I mean, do we need it in the definition of school so that it might be something that would, could these things have to fit in there? Or, I mean, how would we approach that if something like that wanted to go in an area where we do? That's just what I'm asking, I guess.
Okay.
in the sense of-
Actually, we're encouraging a school in the new town center, so it would fit in.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
So it's in the text for that then.
To allow.
Schools
yeah,
would be in our,
in the new innovative site plan development overlay, right.
Would it, since these are typically much more scaled down versions of a school, would it be smarter to make it its own instead of lumping it into schools? Would it make more sense to include it into something else as either a subcategory or, because I don't look at these, testing centers,
Okay,
continuing education facilities, like you said, that's a strip plaza potential application, versus a standalone facility, which is what the school definition is. It kind of really broadens the scope of school.
right.
So does-
I do agree with that. They had suggested too that we even further break down our existing definition of school into more detailed categories is where you're kind of leaning
Right,
towards, like
so like a subcategory,
elementary schools, and then you get into high schools, or the K through 12 schools, and then college and universities being its own definition, and then further breaking it down. I didn't know if we wanted to get into, because our amendments really weren't focused on schools, so that's
Right.
really opening up the
but
door
when you,
to assessing
but
where
when you
we
throw
were-
this into
Yeah.
that definition, that really potentially broadens the scope dramatically of what
I
it
think
could
that
be.
kind of
Okay.
goes to what I was saying, is
Okay.
like, well, how does this ripple its way through the text? I mean,
Right.
I'm fine defining all of that stuff, but what's the broader implication of school?
Is there a
Should we open
better,
up Pandora's box? I mean, is
is there a
this
better
just bring more
application of
issues?
that?
Yeah.
Whether it's maybe in a retail, environment or some other commercial, type of an environment versus, school. I don't know. I don't know that,
My first thing when I was asking, my thing is, do we really want to go down into spending such a time to pick from Heather's phraseology, what the consultant said is that they want to throw these in because it's things they're seeing. Well, 10, 15 years from now, do we really want to go through a whole bunch of work to define something that doesn't have, do we need to really get into a whole thing to break out that? Is there a compelling reason for the zoning text to have that level of detail? Or is it just suffice to put, hey, schools are starting to stretch the bounds here, and there's some other things that sort of fit? I mean, I think, I don't really want to spin off into a lot of categories if there's no compelling need to from a zoning standpoint. If just to acknowledge that this kind of thing is technically a school, I mean, are there other reasons? What are the reasons we're suggesting that we go deeper than even that?
Maybe because you want to allow certain schools in different areas, and you wouldn't, like, you would allow an elementary school in a certain district or neighborhood versus a college and a university, you would probably limit because of the potential impacts. Maybe you wouldn't allow that in your residential districts.
Right.
But
Which
based
brings-
on our existing definition, you could have a college in the R1.
Right.
Based on our group together school.
But if it's all conditional, you said all the schools.
Right,
Then
schools.
you're kind of, we've got that stopgap. Why make things more complicated than they need to be?
Right. This was kind of a simple solution to allow that. If we wanted to really take some time and maybe look at splitting them up, then I think that's gonna, like you said, we look at all the other places, we'd have to do a pretty good analysis of, okay, well, in what areas and under what conditions would we want a college versus an elementary school versus
So since
some kind of
the whole
testing center.
premise of all of this is so generally housekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
from your perspective, stepping back a bit, is there a compelling reason to explore it any further than this? To go down that and break it all out? Do you feel?
No, at this point, I don't. No,
I kind of think simpler is better.
Right.
yeah.
And,
Which
how
brings
many
up-
times is this going to come up in the next 50 years? 3? It's a pretty simple solution. I kind of like it the way it is, with the addition that you put in here.
I feel like someone who may be doing a testing center would be looking for that commercial type town,
Yeah.
district, and they wouldn't be asking to put in a CUP like in a residential area. And if they were, like you said, we've got the conditional use where maybe what they're proposing wouldn't
I'm
be
not in
out there.
favor of complicating it unless there's a broader, more compelling reason to do so.
Which brings up another point. If we put that in like they have for schools, would they have to meet state regulations, requirements that could be quite broad and extensive? for just someone that's setting up a table in like a shopping area, just to educate a small segment of a group?
I don't know what the state licensing requirements would be.
And that's what I mean, is that something where we would have to comply to maybe state regulations, regardless of what we have in our zoning, you know?
Oh, that wouldn't allow them
Because-
to locate in certain areas?
Yeah,
or
you
what?
know, or make them required to have all kinds of, I don't want to say safety or whatever, or requirements for, the state requires for schools in general. Will this require them to do all that also because of,
Oh, you're saying if we label it a school, would that require them to
Yeah.
follow certain state regulations?
correct?
No, I don't think our definitions
No, I
dictate anything to
No?
to the state.
Okay.
No.
State's gonna trump everything we do,
Yeah.
I would think. So-
Just 1 second, I gotta check the heat.
Getting,
Anyone else hot?
it's getting warm.
Okay. Okay. So do we have a general consensus? Do we want to think about it, or?
Fine having it.
I'm good with it.
I'd say keep it with the change that you made.
Okay. You okay with that, or?
No,
you wanna
I
talk-
don't like it.
You don't like it?
I'm outnumbered, so it doesn't matter. I don't like what it, I try to look at the value of the township and what it brings. I don't see what any of that brings to the township as far as value for, for the community. I just don't, that's all. And to allow it to go in there could take up space of something more valuable to the, it's kind of a real niche market.
Well, it's still a conditional, Andy, so this doesn't allow it, it just defines it.
It puts it in there. It's not in there right now.
Yeah.
So you're allowing it in there. That's the thing. As far as I'm concerned, that's not something I'd like to see in there. I don't like what the potential long-term ramifications are. If the goal is town center, and we're trying to attract retail and that type of business, I don't see what a testing center or
But if we have
a
a school
continuing
in the town,
education
if we have a
facility.
school in the town.
You got
center,
Auburn Career Center.
No, but if you have a school in the town center, what's the problem?
Yeah, I don't see the value in it. I think the community already offers that stuff versus what, I don't see any reason to allow it in there. But like I said, that's just my opinion, and everybody else is okay with it, so it's fine, whatever. I'm opposed to it, and I would prefer the record demonstrate that. So,
Okay,
we're moving on.
okay. Okay, one other handout that Sydney has, section 29.
I thought we were on section 11.
Oh, okay, yeah,
I
no,
thought
we
we
can
were going all the way
go
to
through, yeah.
29.
No, we'll do 11. No, section 11, yeah, we can run through that.
I have to start leafing. I'm not that good with all my Roman numerals, I'm not sure. What is 29? XXX what?
XX.
XXV1111
Okay,
or?
section 11, zoning permit.
Excellent, excellent.
There was some housekeeping items in here, just some revisions to increase the clarity of this section. Under section 1101, zoning permit required. Under letter B, we'd like to just clarify that we do want a zoning permit for when a new tenant comes in to an unbuilt-out retail area, for example, like Crowd Crossing. As the tenants come in and they do their own build-out and their interior alterations that might not necessarily be structural alterations, we still want to require them to have that zoning permit, so we can review the layout plan of the floor area and making sure that it's the use that we're going to actually, that it reflects the use for the change of use permit that we'd be issuing them, or the conditional use permit that they're required. It also helps us when calculating their usable floor area for their parking that's required. This is just kind of a rearranging of things. Fences, we already require a fence permit, it's just bringing it down to a different section here. We would like to ask to have residents get a zoning permit for us when they're required to get a zoning, when they're required to get a building permit from Lake County as it relates to retaining walls. So if someone is building a retaining wall that's over 4 feet in height, they are required to get a permit from Lake County Building Department. And we also would like them to get a permit from the zoning department as well, to make sure that it's not encroaching on the neighbor's yard or things like that. This was just rearranging. I mean, we already require permits for signs, swimming pools, other yard structures, gazebos, pavilions. And then we're going to take out L because we're not going to require a demolition permit, a zoning permit for demolition. And then section 1102, the site plan review required prior to issuance of a zoning permit. So a lot of times folks go straight to section 11 zoning permit. When do I need one? And this is just clarifying that, to tell people right up front that you may be required to go through site plan review. So it's just kind of inserting that here, saying what districts that we already require it in, and under what items would not be required to go through site plan review, but could be administratively reviewed by the zoning department. And then the zoning permit review procedure, we're just kind of putting in a little bit of a more step-by-step format for folks to follow. It's the same regulations here. And I believe we went through this before, so there wasn't. I know a lot of this we've been working on, so if something doesn't ring a bell, let me know. But that's really it. The review criteria is the same. Expiration, you have 1 year to start your project, or your permit expires. That's all the same standard. You have 2.5 years to complete. And then under the last section, 1108, we just added in letter B, just reminding folks that if you're doing an agricultural building that is exempt from zoning, then you're not required to get a building permit or a zoning permit. Are there any questions on any of that? Because I think that was all what we've seen in the past. No? Okay. All right, section 13. These were some minor changes that we already reviewed as it related to conditional use permits, and the some of the language in regards to the parking lots. And if you recall, in section 29, we defined like waiting spaces and included some dimensions for waiting spaces for uses that have drive-throughs, like in car washes. So there were some minor changes throughout here as it related to the parking. And this was all everything you've seen before, except for the last section, starting on page 26. So as part of redoing the text for the Innovative Site Plan Development Overlay District, what we did was removed the existing text from the conditional use permit section. So the entire section 13.36 is being striked through, and we're relocating that to a new section 21 that we're going to go over tonight. So instead of it being conditional use, it's going to be a plan development, and we'll go through that. Okay, and then as far as section 15 and the residential districts, there was one minor change that I saw was a typo from a previous amendment on page 5 in table 15.03-1. So in the R1, R4, R6, and 8 districts on lots 2 acres or greater, they are permitted to have the accessory building up to 1,532 square feet. Otherwise, we just didn't cover the 2 acres. We did under and over, but somehow I missed the 2 acres. So that was a change there. And as part of us amending the parking regulations, we made some minor changes in here to reference section 29. So the recreational vehicles section is actually located in the off-street parking section. So we're referencing that, just a little change of the way it's stated there. And then on the last page there, under 15.05, which we did go over this before, was just clarifying that these are the minimum garage requirements per dwelling, because we have the off-street parking area requirement that's also located in section 29. So you have to have a minimum of a 2-car enclosed garage, plus you also have to have, depending on what zoning district you're in, a minimum of 500 square feet of driveway or off-street parking area in addition to that. Okay, section 16, in section 16.07C, so in the PUD, which the only one we have is Quail right now, they are permitted to have a commercial center, and it's subject to them getting a conditional use permit. So this is just clarifying that, stating that subject to section 13, conditional use permits, they could get get an approval for a commercial center. And then it's also clarifying under C2 that they have to go through site plan review. And then this, we already talked about 1609 as it relates to parking, and that we are going to hold them to the same parking standards that are found in 29. Unless they're modified already below in the same section. And section 16.15. Here we're just clarifying this section as it exists. Zoning permits and modifications, because this section actually talks about issuing zoning permits, and then if you need a modification to your plan after you've already been issued your zoning, after you've been issued your zoning permit. So after the final development plan for each phase is approved, zoning inspector issues the zoning permits that comply with the approved final development plan, in accordance to the procedures that already exist in section 11, zoning permits. There's no reason to have separate zoning permit requirements, because a zoning permit is a zoning permit, has the same year to start the project, 2.5 years to complete. This is just clarifying that the zoning inspector will only issue zoning permits that comply with the final approved development plan.
Makes sense.
And then just giving this on the next page, kind of a title here, modifications. So then after the fact, the developer can come back to the zoning inspector and ask for a modification of a final development plan phase. That's just clarifying that, and all those standards stay the same. And as you know, the second half of this section relates to the RCD, which is also plan development, and it has similar language under zoning permits and modifications that we just added modifications, and it refers back to that other section in part 1. Those are kind of some more housekeeping items. Okay, I'm going to skip the innovative site right now, unless you guys want to dive into that. Section 22. All right, let's see. Some of this was due to rearranging because we were getting rid of the existing innovative site plan development and moving it. And then we had some minor changes as it related to the standards that were specific to the capital district only. So on page 22.8, above the table there, you'll see in blue, this was already an existing maximum commercial floor area restriction that we already had in the zoning resolution. It's only specific to the capital district, but it limits the single retail business or single service business square footage to no more than 50,000 square feet, because we don't really want to see any big box type developments in the capital district or in the town center, or the innovative site overlay district as well. But that was just rearranging that existing standard. And then some on page 22.12. These were maintenance standards and that relate to unimproved areas on parcels that we had on record as well was for the capital district. But it does make sense to maybe expand this to all other commercial areas and hold them to the same standards, just requiring them to regularly mow and remove litter and things like that on their lot as long as they're operating there. And then the maintenance of the water courses in the stormwater facilities, just putting it the responsibility of the owner to maintain all those water courses and the stormwater facilities that were approved as part of the site plan. And then you'll see the deletion of 22.10 capital district standards. Some of these were already redundant in the table of dimensions, like the minimum lot size, setbacks, they're already provided in this table 22.04. And then the Concord Circle figure and like the standards that relate to the walls and the design around that feature element, those have been relocated to another section that were under the design standards. And then all these other things that were related to the capital district have been reinserted in other areas or striked out due to the changes that were pending for the innovative site plan development. Like, for example, the pedestrian facilities, we moved that over into the design standards, kind of opening up that section to not only include standards that related to the building, but the built environment as well, like the pedestrian facilities, and then also the roundabout, what was referred to as Concord Circle. Okay, off-street parking, which is the whole reason why we started doing zoning amendments, right? We do have an update. Sydney has an updated version of that. And I highlight, yeah, I know, you love that. And what's highlighted is what changed. So I know you already read through it all, so.
So this gets eliminated?
It was riveting.
Yeah. So all the other changes you saw in your packet, and we went over those before. These other ones that are highlighted are newly proposed ones for your consideration, which all of these are your consideration anyway, but after we had the consultant for the JED that wrote the Concord Town Center Master Plan reviewed a lot of these potential amendments, and we got some feedback from them. So they were suggesting for your consideration a few additional changes. So for under 29.0, the purpose statement, we could add in an additional statement that the purpose of the parking regulations are to try to minimize the creation of the excess impervious coverage, which I know is kind of a goal, and that was one of the reasons why we looked at maybe updating the section by allowing the other bioretention areas and permeable pavement, pervious pavers, those things, that all reduces impervious coverage. And then another purpose of this section would be to encourage shared parking facilities where they're appropriate. So I know we spent a lot of time looking at the shared parking facilities and changing the language there, and off-street, and off-site parking, and we looked at changes to the deferred construction of the required spaces. So I would think that these are two important purposes that we should probably add to the purpose statement, if you agree.
Agreed.
I'll just keep going unless someone stops me, if you want. Is that how we want to do it? Okay, all right. Okay. I'm just going to touch upon the highlighted ones, because as you know, we've already looked at totally changing this section in the past. So 29.02, this whole applicability, we kind of already went through there. When do these regulations apply? How does it relate to existing uses? Who's in charge of maintaining the off-street parking areas? When is a plan required to be submitted for review? And then some additional maintenance standards of the parking lot, which we touched upon the storage, the landscaping reference to the existing landscape section, fire code, drainage. Under surfacing, there was a suggestion that we also allow not only asphalt and concrete, but also concrete pavers and/or concrete permeable paver systems for parking lots, which we do kind of already allow, and we were suggesting to add in, if you recall, the porous pavement, and all that's subject to approval by Lake County Engineer, because they're not going to let somebody do something that's not going to meet their standards for engineering. So if you're okay with, we could also add in concrete paver and concrete permeable paver systems as an acceptable solution for a parking lot. So I think what we have out here with the storm, that's permeable pavers, which are slightly different. I was reading up on that, it gets a little confusing, but there's permeable pavers, porous pavers, and pervious pavers, and they all kind of treat stormwater differently. So it's kind of interesting.
It's all a new technology of different ground cover that they have on the market today. I mean, it seems like every year there's something new that they've added, that how they've treated concrete, or they can mold concrete and stuff to make it look like brickwork and old cobblestone, for example. Each one has its own function. Some are more porous, that allows the water rather than to stay on top of the surface, where it could be slippery.
Right.
It'll be absorbed inside, so and just dries much quicker. It's like the asphalt you see now being used on highways. It used to be so shiny all the time because it was holding water. Now it's a more porous material that runs the water off to the side and less chance of hydroplaning.
Oh, okay.
These kind of brick stuff has the same effect. Actually, it's better. It's long lasting too. It doesn't break up and as much, especially when you have weather conditions like we have in Ohio with the cold, extreme cold and that. This is more flexible. So it's good stuff.
Okay. Good. Just gonna flip through. Okay, under our 29.05 alternative parking options, where we discuss under A, the deferred construction of required parking. So the thought was to add in, for it to read, if the number of required parking spaces is substantially larger than the number anticipated by the applicant and as proven in their development plan parking demand study, that the applicant provides sufficient evidence, basically the zoning commission could approve a site plan with a reduced number of parking spaces. And I think the key point here is require them to submit to you a parking demand study. Then you have something to look at to say, okay, yeah, truly, okay, their parking demand is way lower and make sure that parking demand study isn't at Christmas time, during holidays. Like, it needs to be on an average type day. So by requiring them to submit to you that parking demand plan or study, it would help you make a better decision on whether or not you would want to waive some parking requirements. When we've talked about traffic studies a lot, but we've never asked anyone to provide a parking demand study. And I think that makes sense too. I don't remember if someone on this board was asking about how too much parking. So if someone's proposing way over the amount of parking that the code requires, you could maybe ask for a parking demand study, or prove to me that you really need all this, twice the amount of parking that, the code says you need. If you have that parking demand study, it may help the reviewing board and staff look at these things moving forward. Especially if the innovative site plan development, or if anyone were ever to get, that application approved and move forward, I think that would really help for that purpose. And during our regular site plan review process, a request to reduce the amount of parking was asked for.
Anytime you can have more green space rather than asphalt, I'm all for it,
Okay.
So you got my vote on that.
And I think that would help ease your mind too, that if you were going to grant a reduction, that there wouldn't be the chance that the demand was way more than
Sure.
what they said it was going to be, hypothetically. On the next page, under B, which is the shared off-street parking, number 5, it's highlighted here. In the proposed innovative site PD overlay district, within the mixed-use areas and any commercial or office neighborhoods, it was suggested that we add this language in, kind of limiting the amount or the percentage of parking that could be shared but on the same site, and then limiting the percentage of parking that could be off-site. The shared parking concept could go up to 85% of parking could be within a shared facility. And this is only in the ISPD, the Innovative Site Plan Development. Or no more than 50% could be off-site. And then just turning the page on number 6, I inserted the word, not a parking study, but a parking demand study may be required, just to make the language consistent there. And on page 15, under the letter D, under the bioretention and interior landscaping section that we already worked on, there's a couple changes here. For the bioretention cells, where they could be arranged between or adjacent to rows or aisles within the parking lot. And then also number 3 was limiting curb cuts only only allowing curb cuts where it allows stormwater through those locations that are adjacent to the bioretention or landscape areas that are designed to actually receive that stormwater. So you don't want people just doing those curb cuts in areas where it doesn't make any sense. And then on the page 29.17, it's section 29.08, the bicycle parking. I know we talked about this in depth, and the consensus was that we didn't want to require folks to put in bicycle racks on any non-residential site, but we are going to try to encourage them by putting that language in, saying that they're encouraged on the non-residential sites, including the commercial areas and the public use areas. However, I would ask you to maybe reconsider that and just put in, maybe and just add it. And I wasn't saying it shall, like it must be, but and maybe you would be open to that. But just stating that 1 bicycle parking space should be provided for every 10 car parking spaces, and that you could spread those bicycle parking spaces like throughout the site. However, it made sense, because the ultimate goal of part of the Concord Town Center Master Plan is to get folks from communities from the west and east to be able to get to the town center. So if they had a way to get there from Cryle Road, or if they had a way to get there, really couldn't come from the west, really, from Discovery. But if we had some bike facilities around and places to park your bikes, that we could get folks over to the town center. So, I put it in as a should, so it's not required, but I think even if we just add it in as a should and state how many, 1 per every 10, like, it gives somebody an idea of what we would like to see if they were gonna try to do it. And maybe we can encourage them in certain situations as a negotiation type, a tool on a site plan review that we're doing. If it made sense. Like, I know the Starbucks, they supposedly have a bicycle rack there. Did you see it when you were there today?
Notice.
No. Their plans had one, so I don't know. People are voluntarily doing it. Maybe it was part of their overall
I'm all,
corporate.
even as the cyclist on the board, I'm all big on encouraging at this point, just because it's suburbia, it's the infrastructure there makes, I think it still makes it hard to, but I'm all about encouraging it, and I think I like your idea of giving people an idea of, because it's kind of a new concept potentially, so I think what you're suggesting is we look at something like that as a benchmark. It's a place for someone to start. We're saying, well, how would I do that? Or what do you think? And we point them in a direction. I don't see anything wrong with that.
And I agree with Morgan, because if we take a look at the town center concept down the road, if we have residential communities in there, it'd be very easy to bicycle from the residential communities further down the road into the town center, and be very convenient to have bicycle parking.
Right.
So down the road, I think that would make a lot of sense.
If it gets, you could end up back at that issue later if it becomes more of a, it's so far in the future, I think, right now that leaving it the way it got, I think suggestion is good. Getting deeper into it, because if it starts to become more of an issue, it's kind of like other parking things, we'll probably be back at greater depth at some point talking about that.
I agree. If you look at most, like the suburbs around even Cleveland, they all now, even the streets are all have their bike lanes already to encourage people like coming from the west side of Cleveland downtown, because more of the millennials are doing that, riding their bikes across the bridge and going to work that way rather than taking cars. So out here it'll be the same thing. We have all of this Quail Hollow here. We're building that. I think a lot of people would like to go across and be able to shop their bikes. That's where the bridge comes in and goes across.
Yeah, over 44. Yeah,
But I mean, having spots for them to do that'd be great.
yeah.
I'm all for it. I bike. So,
And that kind of wraps it up on that section. Section 34, the fences. This was something that we didn't talk about in the past, but currently under 34.02, we have a statement in here that if you have a parcel of 2 acres or greater, you're not required to obtain a zoning permit for your fence. And a long time ago, the thought was, well, usually if you're on a large parcel like that, you're putting it up for agricultural purposes. Well, the ORC is very clear on, exemption from township zoning. If you truly are an agricultural use, you aren't subject to township zoning, which means you would not be required to get a zoning permit for your fence. So what I'm proposing is we just strike that sentence out and we require anyone that's putting up a fence to get a zoning permit, other than if you're an agricultural use. I know at one point it was at 1 acre, and then I think you bumped it up to 2 acres, and I think from an enforcement standpoint, since they are held subject to the same height restrictions and things like that, it would just make sense for every property owner in a residential district that's going to put up a fence that meets these parameters to come and get a zoning permit from our office. If you guys would agree with that.
Yes.
it's a good idea because you have to know where your boundary lines are for one thing. So permit would go in that direction, let them know that they should check their boundary lines and stuff before they put a fence up.
Right. Or at least they know someone's kind of looking.
Right,
That
exactly.
they're required to know where they are.
Right, exactly.
All right, now the site plan review, if you recall, there was that recent case law that was stating that the site plan review process really should be in the hands of solely of the zoning commission. So that was partially why we started looking at section 36. Currently how it is, if your use is for a conditional use, you were supposed to go in front of the BZA for your site plan review and for your conditional use, and then you came back in front of the zoning commission for your design review. Well, with these changes, if you need site plan review, you're going to be in front of the zoning commission. And then if you also need a conditional use permit, you go to the BZA and you'll get your conditional use permit approval. So they would most likely approve the conditional use permit with the condition that they get their site plan approved by, the zoning commission, in addition to anything, other safeguards or conditions that they may have on the approval. And then you'd still be doing the design review, reviewing the landscape plans, their overall layout plan, you'd still be looking at all those same items. And some of the other changes in here was just tightening up some of the language, and moving some things around that we've already discussed at previous work sessions. Now, there are some new changes under the design standards that I did reference a little bit here, and that, under 37.03, we added in a reference to the new innovative site plan development overlay, so they would be subject to these design standards as well. And then under A there, we're just clarifying some of the additional items that would be subject to design review on a site plan. Not only the buildings, but also the signs need to be looked at, trash enclosures, fences, if they're doing any pedestrian facilities, lighting, that all needs to be reviewed as part of design review. And it already was technically, but I think this really clarifies it for the applicant. It really holds them to make sure they submit all those items, so you have everything you need in front of you. Because I know since I've been here, they haven't been submitting signs as part of their site plan review and design review, and they're coming in after, because they're saying, oh, well, we don't know what we're going to do with our sign, we're just going to put it here. And then they come in after they've already got their zoning permit and they're building the building, and then they have this sign that they want to put up. And that really should be reviewed as part of, okay, how does it look with the building, and how does it relate, and what does it look like? That should be done by this board, not after they've already got all their zoning approval and they're just trying to push things through. It needs to be scrutinized as well, especially with how Cryle Road is going to be developing, and Capitol and the town center. I mean, we need to hold the developers to a little bit more of a higher standard and make sure they're bringing all that information. Even what are the parking lot fixtures? What are they going to look like? That kind of level of detail. On page 5, section 3707, this was the pedestrian facilities that is currently located under section 22 as it related to the Capitol District. By moving it here, this would be potentially reviewed as part of the site plan review process under design review. And most of this is if you read, these are basically the same language. Public sidewalks, that still all may be required. It's not a shall, it's maybe, depending on the location. I mean, if it's going to be in the town center, you're going to be required based on other standards that are going to be in section 21. But these are the existing standards that we have in there, just relocated to this section. Same thing with the 3708, the maximum setbacks and wall orientation for quote-unquote Concord Circle. These were developed when we adopted the original text for the Capitol District. But we want to ensure that during innovative site plan development, if an application were to be applied for that, that they would also be held to these standards as well. So it's really just the capital district, and then if there was an innovative site plan development. Okay, the landscaping, section 38. Just a small clarification under 3802. Just kind of a changing in the language here as to when a plan is required to be submitted during site plan review. And for any new construction, reconstruction, it also included in the innovative site plan development overlay district, so they also would be held to these landscaping and screening standards, in addition to some other ones that will be in the new potential section as well. So we added a reference into them, to that new district. Then there's a few exceptions out of some existing standards here for the innovative site PD overlay district, because there's more stringent or standards that actually relate to that district only. So in general, the innovative site plan development has to meet their standards, but then there's some areas where they don't have to because they're held to a different standard. So that's what most of these small potential changes are. The other ones we've talked about when we discussed the parking lot and the interior parking lot landscaping. Did you have any questions on any of those? All right, and then the last section is the Innovative Site PD Overlay District. And we have a slightly revised version of that based on input.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we had the consultant for the Concord Town Center Master Plan review these potential amendments, and they had some suggestions to tighten language up a little bit. So that's why I have a different copy for you this evening. Did you have? Sorry, the staple's on the wrong side.
I was going to say,
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
This was just a quick, something that I put together. As you know, the Concord Town Center Master Plan was adopted by the Board of Trustees on December 21st, 2016. I just grabbed a couple snapshots of some of the images that were in there. I know we had that one work session with the consultant over at the community center, and kind of started to get into some of these things, but kind of didn't get to discuss everything. So I just pulled in a few of the elements. So this was like the overall neighborhood plan, master plan, just kind of showing what it could potentially look like with the townhome neighborhood, maybe the multifamily neighborhood. A civic component that focuses on the natural resources here, the pond that's there, and utilizing that as a public recreation open space, where then at the intersection of Capitol and Auburn, there could be this dense, like, mixed-use area, where there could be commercial, residential, above commercial, office, and then like a commercial and office space neighborhood to the east of that. So this is just one overall plan that, they think could actually happen. And this and all the specific streetscape standards and all the setbacks and everything that we're proposing in section 21 for the innovative site, they're all based off of all the planning and all the work that Reisinger did for the JED and for the trustees for this plan. within that plan, they had recommended a potential area to overlay this, and that's the next image on there. So this is kind of going over land that's currently zoned capital district, and then also it's maybe expanded over to area that's zoned currently the RD2. So the next page is showing, well, the next page, they had went in very detail in the town center master plan of very general recommendations that we should do to change our zoning text to make this plan happen, and then they also went into very specific detailed recommendations, and that's what staff used to make the changes to section 21 in order to create zoning text that could actually be implemented. So the draft text tonight, could actually work if to create some of these plans and images and the visualizations and articulation that we've seen within the overall Concord Township Town Center Master Plan. So how this overlay district would work from an ORC standpoint, the ORC allows townships to adopt plan unit development regulations under a couple different ways. We currently already have on text the PUD and the RCD. And in those cases, we have zoning text in place for a plan development. However, the land is not zoned for a plan development. What makes this different is what we're doing is we're creating the text and we're already picking out the land that it would apply to. So through this text amendment, we would be adopting the zoning text that could apply, and we're also overlaying the district over the existing zoning. So we can't force a plan development on anybody. You can't do that. So if they don't apply to be within the innovative site PD, then they just build with the underlying zoning. So they can just still develop under Capital District, say somebody buys the corner of Capital and 44 tomorrow, and they're ready to build. Well, all they have to do is meet the regular Capital District standards. If they buy like Normandy's Park property over, the property where the new Capital Parkway extension is, if they buy that tomorrow and they want to do, a project under the Capital District, they can. However, the ultimate goal would be to find a master developer who would look at all this potential and have a master plan for all of that area over there and potentially build it out in phases. And if we get that right developer, what they would need to do is apply put in an application to be an innovative site plan development, and with that they submit their development plan application. And then if it went through that whole process and it was approved, then the zoning would change. It wouldn't be a zoning map amendment at that point because we've already rezoned the land when we've adopted this text and the map that's actually within the text. So when you look through your packet over the weekend or earlier this week, you probably saw the map in there. So these are the potential parcels that should be rezoned or overlaid, I should say, with the innovative site plan development. In this additional handout that we just gave you tonight, there is a table of what those parcels are if you're interested, what the parcel numbers are, who the property owners are. It's approximately 175 acres.
As of this point, have we had anyone that's interested in developing that whole area for us?
We're not quite there yet.
Oh, but there is.
What's that?
There is some interest in.
I don't know. The JED board is undergoing, they're still doing an RFQ to put out an RFP looking for request for qualifications and then request for proposals to find a master developer. They haven't done that yet, so that's in process. But I know that the consultant that's been working on this has been in contact with developers that they know from previous business dealings, and the general consensus is that, yeah, I mean, this is somewhat a feasible project that could spark interest from the right person. So it's not just pie in the sky type thing.
So there are people in there that seem to be interested.
There may be, yeah.
Maybe. You're a good politician. Maybe, but not sure, but could be. But I'll tweet you.
That's being the
But I'll
truth, though.
tweet you, right?
I haven't talked to any of that yet. so.
Okay, good.
So the other handout I gave you was just a quick way to see like how we would potentially process the plan approval. So a developer would submit, would be required to have a pre-application conference with the zoning inspector, potentially a trustee or a zoning commission member or any other county department agencies. They are required to have that first preliminary pre-application conference. Then after they do that, they could submit their formal application and development plan to the township, which then our department would have 10 days to review it to make sure they've submitted everything in order to put it on the agenda. So then at that point, it's similar to how we do site plan review. We would send those plans to, county engineer, the water department, Soil and Water Conservation District, Planning Commission. They would be reviewing those and weighing in, giving us their comments as well. And then the Zoning Commission would have a public meeting on that development plan and application. And then it could be 1 or 2 meetings, and then at the end of that, you would make a recommendation to the trustees as whether to approve it or to not approve the application, or maybe approve it with some modifications. And then at that point, the trustees would review that at a public meeting as well, or several meetings depending on. And then at the conclusion of their meetings, they would vote on it. So that's potentially how the process would go. But as far as the specific text, the breakdown, we have the purpose statements, which some of these were from the Capital District, and then a lot of these were from the master plan. So obviously, one of our main goals is to create a destination town center that reflects Concord Township and its focus on family and community. We want to provide a walkable, bikeable access to and from the town center. Part of that is increasing the residential density. That way, we're able to attract and retain growing populations. I mean, we want to try to keep millennials here, and not only the seniors that are here. And from what we're seeing, they're both looking for the same type of environments. They're looking for kind of walkable, bikeable communities, low maintenance properties. So I think that would help Concord keep both those segments of population and everyone in between. We also want to obviously focus on utilizing the part of the Capitol Parkway extension was opening up the possibilities of that land back there. So this, as you know, since at least 2007, since they did the Auburn Crowell corridor plan, they've been talking about some kind of town center. And over the years, it's been modified, and with the 2015 comprehensive plan update, the zoning commission and the committee that helped with the comprehensive plan update worked with the consultants on looking again at a town center over in that area. And then obviously more recently we've hired another consultant to really define what the Concord master plan could be, and that's kind of where we are today with these proposed amendments. So we really want something, an application and a development plan that's really going to be compatible and support the master plan. Section 2102 describes how the overlay is established, which I somewhat did describe to you as it relates to 519-021C of the ORC. There are a few definitions that are very specific to this section. Otherwise, all the other existing ones in section 5 apply. So, as you know, with this potential plan development, they would like to see some townhomes and what we're calling vertical multifamily buildings. Based on the definitions here, a townhome would have 2 or 3 stories and no more than 2 to 6 dwelling units within a building. And then vertical multifamily buildings would contain between 10 and 40 dwelling units per building. So section 2104, principal permitted uses. Here's a specific list of uses that would be allowed within the district. These should all look familiar to you because most of these are allowed in the existing GB district and the B1, the capital district. The only additional ones, like I mentioned, were the townhomes and then the vertical multifamily, and then
It's a
also.
big one,
Right,
big.
yeah.
Who wrote this?
Who wrote this? I ended up writing this,
Okay.
yeah. And this was, like I said, based on the master plan, on also specific recommendations through the master plan from the consultant. This was input from the consultant. Obviously, we had legal counsel review it. The trustees have had a chance to review it. I didn't really get any feedback at this point yet. But yeah.
Yeah, because we had that one meeting at the community center, and there was a lot of questions. A lot of that went unanswered. And I was expecting some follow-up meetings from that, and there hasn't been. And now we get dropped. This is a pretty big bomb, in my opinion. This whole innovative site overlay district. I mean, it's first I'm seeing it. First I've really and I think there were a lot of questions about the density and the overall construction and everything else. And it's interesting that here all of a sudden we got this whole written out. I would have expected a lot more input into this before this would have been presented.
Okay. Well, I too also thought that there was going to be a follow-up meeting with the consultant, because
Right.
that's what I heard when I was there, but.
Right, that's what I thought it was pretty clear after that meeting, that there were a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of unanswered issues.
Right, because,
And there was gonna be another meeting to kind of clear all that up, and that kind of never happened. And now all of a sudden, we got this whole new district plan and the potential, I don't know, I don't know.
I know you didn't get an opportunity to get on board with the master plan.
That's right.
Right. I
Exactly.
get that.
Yeah, there wasn't an opportunity for some buy-in on this, in my opinion.
Maybe the way we could address it, Andy, is since we got this, like you say, I was at the meeting too, and there was a lot of questions. Maybe we should have meeting maybe on this, at least among us, to iron things out and discuss things about this on this section.
Well-
Since they didn't want to have another meeting, and Andy and I knew about all the questions that were coming up, and please, not take anything away from the work you did.
Right.
It's not meant to be that, okay? But we know there was a lot of questions that came up that we should probably maybe, at least this section here, maybe have a meeting of our own to go over this a little bit more in depth, pick your brain a little bit more. and
Okay,
Find out why they came up with the stuff that's in here,
okay,
just to make us feel more comfortable
okay.
before we go farther.
I find that maybe a little challenging, because, what was proposed in here was coming out of the master plan. So that's where, I was using that as the guide. So some of the, I'm just fearful, you may have questions like, well, why do we need all this density? And it's like, I don't have the exact answer that the consultant would give you, because those I mean, they wrote the master plan. So the thought was, the trustees are on board with it. This meets it. This is where they'd like to go. I mean, obviously you have to somewhat be agreeable to it and understand it, but,
So there's sort of two parts to this, right?
Okay.
So there's the plan. There's
Right.
The master plan is the
Right.
concept behind it, and this is the tool to execute it.
that implements it, right. So it sounds like to me you're struggling with the master plan. Is that right? Or, I mean, this too, because this is what would implement it.
You have some serious reservations about the whole thing. You know, so. I'm not even close to being convinced.
Do you want to try to ask some of your questions now, or do you want to like?
No,
You don't
I'd like to have some more time to look, to
Okay.
review everything and go through it.
Okay,
But I have some serious reservations
okay,
about where this is gonna go and the overall impact on the community and everything else. I'm not, based on that meeting, I wasn't real impressed with that initial meeting, and kind of the way the whole thing was packaged, and presented. It left a lot of open-ended issues, in my opinion. And, I mean, it's great for, a consulting firm from Chicago to come in and make a bunch of recommendations, and then they step out, and then we're left to live with it. And I just don't know that, what fits in certain demographics and areas might, don't necessarily fit here. And I have some serious reservations about the overall concept and whether or not that really fits into the community. That's the way I feel. I'm definitely not on board with it. If you were gonna ask me for a decision right now, I'd say I wouldn't support this. I couldn't support this with not having all the information, that I feel is necessary. It's a very impactful situation for the community. Very impactful. And it's gonna have it's gonna have major ramifications, long-term ramifications, to the community. I wouldn't want to see this, kind of ramrodded through and then have a lot of regret after the fact. Something of this nature, to me, requires a lot more consideration. So.
okay.
And just to give a counterpoint to that, I too was at the meeting, and I had benefit to being at a secondary meeting. And I was very impressed with it, and I love everything about it. And I think to be able to get where we want to go with this, you have to have some sort of a basic outline plan, which I kind of think this is it. And as it unfolds, it's not going to happen today or this year or probably next year, but as it unfolds, it's probably going to come in pieces, and every one of those pieces would come before us and give us the opportunity to review for the fit. But if you don't have an overall plan for the development, then you have nothing to compare to and guide to. And if we were to sit down with anybody and have a meeting, I don't think that meeting would ever end, because you're not going to be convinced, and maybe others aren't going to be convinced. There's varying opinions, but overall, if the trustees feel that this is the direction we need to go, then we need a plan to get there. And this sort of gives me an outline or a plan that says this is how it would unfold.
Would it be fair to say, back to the point I was saying, is that we have a comprehensive plan and we have a tool, some text. This is the whole, if you build it, they will come. This is the whole, yes, we allow you to build this if you showed up to do it. If we put this on the table and nobody shows up to build it, it never happens. The developer actually has to say, this demographically makes sense, and they are going to put the money into it. So I guess my comment before, and I don't know where this really leaves it, is to sit there and say, I think, Heather, you're right. I mean, we're having two conversations here. We have a comprehensive plan that we've been kind of going down this road for. This is a tool to implement it. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the comprehensive plan? We're talking about the tool. I think it's important to keep that conversation separate, because this is not, I suppose it's a sort of backway and not endorsement of the plan, but the plan is the plan. This is a tool. They're not, in my mind, they're separate things. I think if we got conversations about the plan, then that's a plan conversation. This is text to open the door for that opportunity, that potential. And I think I kind of go back on the whole, free market capitalism. No developer's going to do it if they can't pull it off.
True.
we're not gonna spend the money to put up multi-tenants and that sort of thing. And, the density, I know that's been a concern of some people in the township. We've talked about the comprehensive plan for a while, and if I recall that meeting from a month or two ago, that was the crux of the conversation was around density and kind of housing, and I think that sort of seems to be the one issue. So I don't know where that leaves us as far as having that debate or that conversation, but I think it's important to keep the comprehensive plan and this tool as two separate conversations. How do we feel about the tool, the way it's worded, the way it's written, the way it's structured, how we use it, and the comprehensive plan are two separate discussions.
But I think when you start floating terms like RFQ, RFP, that means that's serious. That's not, you don't throw those things out
I
there.
didn't say they weren't serious.
No, I'm saying, but when you start throwing those things out there, that sounds to me like this is a lot further down the road than what I think some people realize.
I guess I don't agree with that. I don't know how we could have had the conversation so far, and if someone's coming in for a proposal, I'll reiterate my point. Why are they making a proposal if they don't feel that it's viable? If they're making the proposal that feels viable, and we've had this comprehensive plan, and we're going in a direction, a conversation going on near a decade, why are we questioning that? If they're prepared to make the investment and feel like it's viable, what is it and we're not? Now, that's kind of a macro. I mean, there's definitely, what is it that they're seeing that makes it viable? I think those are very valid questions, and we have the right to see that and ask those questions. But again, as we're talking about the viability of this text and this tool, I think that's a separate discussion. I don't know where that fits in the flow of this, but I think it's talking about zoning text and we're talking about a direction of the plan. I think those are two separate things.
I agree. I think we need this document
To go forward.
to go forward, right?
To maybe even have some of those conversations, because you can't discuss a proposal. Nobody's going to make a proposal if this isn't available to them. They're not going to go through the time and effort to look at that if this road is not sketched out or paved for them to go down. Why would they spend the time to figure it out?
Okay.
So where does it leave us?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll.
Where does it leave us now?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, Andy's the one that's raised the question, so I'll ask him what makes you comfortable to go forward? What's next in your mind? You raised the concern.
I'd like some time to go over this whole district and really take a look at a lot of the, there's some very specific things that are spelled out in this district, proposal that, I think we ought to take a closer look at.
How does
Okay.
tabling that topic fit with your
Oh,
timeline?
I mean, no, that's fine. If you need to take more time and review this section and touch, if you want to, and please feel free in between meetings, like email me, call me, maybe we could have, Andy, another discussion about the overall master plan too, if you want to try to get some of those questions answered from the bigger picture. I can
Right.
try to help facilitate that.
Heather,
Or
just to
anyone
clarify, this document is section 21 that you've written up, would tie nicely with the package that was given to us by the consultants, correct? It all blends together as it's currently written?
Oh, this I put together.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean,
Yeah.
That's-
the package that they presented to us,
Oh, yeah. mhm.
that would tie nicely with this, I
Yeah,
believe,
right,
correct?
right. This
Yeah.
text was the
Right,
implementation.
this is based
yeah.
on what they presented to us, right?
Yeah,
So
That was a pretty massive presentation.
it was like a 300-page.
Yeah,
Yeah,
300 pages.
it is.
With the case studies and, yeah, the case studies, the visualization and the articulation, and then they did their due diligence and went through our zoning very specifically, and I know no one has a hard copy of that, but we still have that, the flip book link, so if you want to go back, I can email that to you.
Yeah, why don't
again.
you refresh that? to
I
everybody
can
so
send
we
that
can-
link back out to everyone if you want to look again directly at the master plan. Okay.
the way it's written, you can't print it on your home printer because it's too big.
Right.
But they can give you a copy, because I happen to have one. And they'll
Okay.
give you a copy that they've already pre-printed, that, anybody could sit and review. So you can get it from the consultant.
Yeah, or Andy, I have a hard copy in the office if you want to borrow it, if you'd rather look at a hard copy and then, okay.
I think it's important, too, to remember, this is just a proposal at this stage. I mean, the RFQ can go out, but anybody that comes in is certainly going to have their own interpretation of what they think could be successful here. And they're not going to do it, to Morgan's point, they're not going to do it unless it's economically viable. And so they may take a look at this or the big plan and say, I could do a portion of that, or I could do it a little bit differently. So I think there's still a lot of flexibility out there. But again, all of it has to come before us at some point to be zoned.
Yeah, and I think leaving that meeting, I sort of feel like some of the the questions about the housing specifically was very, I don't know, it's been a couple months, so don't hold me to anything, but I feel like there was a little bit of, they did dance a little bit and there was some, I don't know, like great answers, but it was kind of, so I'm wondering if going forward with this doesn't help us see more clearly some of that information. And I think, raising the question, I'll definitely go back and look for a couple things specifically now in my mind, but, and I'd be curious to see some of that stuff, supporting for that. I think the demographic stuff, that meeting got long, and I think some of it, for us that haven't lived in it as much maybe as trustees and the staff, maybe it was a little bit much to take in on that much information that was compiling so much work and kind of really distill it into some specific points. So there may be some advantage in us taking a look at a couple of specific things again that Andy's raised. I'm in favor of taking a look at this and using the tool to move forward so we can continue that process, because I think it's an exciting opportunity. Certainly don't want to see the township do something that's not viable, but I think continue to move this process along is an important part of getting to that destination.
Okay. All right, so read it more, digest it, ask me questions in between now and the next time we meet, and we'll just see where we're at as far as what direction we're going to go.
Okay,
All right?
that's all of the addendums, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's everything.
Very good. Okay, moving on to item 2 then on the agenda would be our normal correspondence report from the zoning commission members. Andy, anything?
Nope.
Rick?
Nothing.
Morgan? No. Frank? Nothing, and I had nothing either. That leads us to item 3, the approval of the February meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes of the meeting of February 7th.
Okay, Rick, second? Anybody? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And I'm going to abstain because I wasn't here. Our next meeting then of the zoning commission is April 4th, 2017. And with that, we'll adjourn.